I am Adam Weil, partner at White Rabbit Group. Welcome to the Pixel Perfect podcast, where we share knowledge, experiences, and motivations from creatives and entrepreneurs. Very excited today to introduce Belle Frank. Belle Frank is the former Chief of Strategy Officer at VML. She's been in the agency space over 40 years and is extremely passionate about research, as well as growing teams and really helping designers and creatives find their voice, especially on the starting point of their career path. So really excited to dive into some of these topics. Belle, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here. It's always fun to talk about new stuff. So new work.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm excited to dive into it. And obviously you have a wealth of experience. And so I'd love to dive into some of that experience and hopefully pull out some insights from that. Tell us a little bit about your career journey so far. I want to understand that path and just kind of start high level, and then we'll drill down from there.
Well, so I'm glad you used the word path. I'm happy to trace mine, but we're going to talk a little bit about whether that's actually useful or if there's something else that could be more useful for job seekers. I have a job that when I was looking for a job, I didn't even know it existed. I did not study advertising. I was a foreign language major and loved to travel and was very interested in words and language, but I didn't really know there was such a thing as communications as a field. So it's a very long time ago, but I say to people all the time, you should follow what your heart is telling you you're interested in, and then that will come back to help you. And I still believe that. It's changed a little now. So I got out of school. I got a job with a research company. Oh, no, I have a master's degree. I should say that. I have a master's, and it's an ed psych kind of master's. But I thought I wanted to make TV programs for kids. I actually thought I wanted to work on Sesame Street because Sesame Street was new then. And if you read The Tipping Point, the program that he describes at Harvard Ed was where I was. And I thought, oh, I could work there. And then there was only one job and I didn't get it. So I took a job with a research company and started testing advertising and thought, oh, this might be fun to make. And so I kind of migrated there. And since I really didn't know a lot about advertising, I got two job offers. One was with a research company and one was in the research department, actually. And one paid more and was in the business development department. And if I tell you the amounts that these jobs paid, it just is mortifying. You know, I think I was at that time earning under $10,000 a year, and this job paid almost 20. And I thought, I'm going to take that one, even though in truth, probably the research job was probably a better fit. I just thought, I'm going to take this. I don't know what it is, and I'm going to see. And the real thing that drove me there, which is a lesson I will never forget, is that I just liked the people better. The biz dev people just that I was speaking to seemed exciting and fun. And I thought I might like to work with them. And so from that experience, I had I had wonderful exposure to senior leadership, to the way the agency worked, to all the different pieces that I don't know how long it would have taken me to get if I had gone sort of a more vertical way into research and strategy. But at the end of that time, when I had been exposed to so many people, the CEO said to me, okay, what do you want to do next? And I said, I want to do client service. And he said, are you sure you don't want to do research? And I said, with all the hubris of youth, I said, well, you just think I can't cut it because you're now enamored with MBAs and I don't have an MBA. And he said, no, Belle, I just think you'll like it better. And I didn't listen, and he helped me get into another. And I did that for 5 years and I was miserable. I learned a lot, and I actually think it helped me become better at what I did because I truly understood what agencies need, what clients need, but I wasn't happy. And then I kind of migrated. I had a baby. I was the first person to come back to work having had a baby at that company. And I said, I think I'd like to go in the research department. And I think I'd like to be something that no one's ever heard of, which is called a part-time professional. And so I did get a gig like that, um, which, you know, I would have taken any deal. I couldn't believe it. But it actually taught me the beginnings of my lessons, right? Which is pick by people and follow your heart. And those kinds of things really shaped what I think are really important when you're looking for work. So
Mm.
I had a lot of gigs. Every time I thought I would leave the company, I mean, I am a unicorn, right? I stayed at this same company, which changed 5 million times, went from private to public, maybe not 5 million, private to public, then a merger, then a takeover, went on and on and on. Um, but I really was, every time I wanted to leave, somebody would say, "Why don't you try working on this?" And it would always be something fascinating. And I would say, yes. That was another lesson I learned. Like, always do the thing the company wants you to do, unless you hate it, because you might you're helpful then.
Mm.
You're actually helping them. So see if you can make it. There might be a reason they want you to do it. And you might really learn something and you might be very useful. And so every time I wanted to leave, they said, "No, do this, do this." So I did.
Mm.
So
Hmm.
I did.
Yeah.
It was a much less, when I look at my kids and their strategies for their careers, theirs are much more deliberate. Mine
Mm.
was a little, let the universe tell
Kind of
me.
meander it around a little bit,
A
learn a little
little
bit
bit.
here, learn a little bit there, and took it
Yeah.
with you.
Yeah. But I always, when the fit was wrong, I spoke up. Jobs are about fit. They're not about what you know. They're sort of the combination of how you like to work, what you like to do, and
Mm.
how you can contribute. And
Mm.
I I think that's why I felt like you should talk to people about the voice, not just the path. So those
Mm.
are the steps I took. But more interestingly is, how do you figure out what kinds of things you like to do and how you like to spend your time? So
Right. And what is I feel like you have principles almost. You mentioned like pick your people. There's a
yep.
couple others in there. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of those maybe principles you have?
So it's very funny, when I got ready to retire, some of the people that I worked with gave me this printed up volume with all these principles, and I thought, oh, I must be repetitive because I must say the same thing over and over. So I definitely say pick by people. People get in the advertising business, get seduced by client names like,
Mm.
"Oh, I want to work on this beer account." Well, if you're a strategist, what you really want to do is work on something that affects people's lives in a very serious way,
Mm.
maybe like healthcare. Even though the ads might not be so sexy, you really can contribute and find it fascinating. And so
Mm.
the when I worked on our brand study, the guy who came to me and said, "I'd like you to help with this," was a really good guy, a really smart researcher. And I thought it would be fun to try to do that with him. So
Mm.
pick by people is a must for me.
Mm.
I also used to have a rule about, how do you know when it's time to move on, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I say to people all the time, there's three legs to the stool.
Mm-hmm.
The first is, are you for me was, and I think people find this useful, are you learning and growing? So
Mm-hmm.
that's the first leg. So then you ask yourself, yes or no, am I learning and growing? The second leg is, do I have the kind of autonomy or experience I need?
Mm.
In those days, and I had little kids, I needed to have somebody who would tolerate, remember, there was no voicemail, there was no email, there was no time shifting. So if you weren't there, you were really kind of putting yourself, on the mommy track, they called it. So when
Mm.
I did that, I knew that it wouldn't drive my career forward at the same pace, but it was the kind of autonomy and experience I needed. I was commuting. I mean, there was no work from home. So it really was the second part of the stool. And then the third one was compensation.
Mm.
And so what I'd say to people all the time is, if 2 out of 3 are okay, then maybe you stick.
Mm.
If
Okay.
if 1 out of 3 is not good, you definitely stick. At 2 out of 3, you start to look. So
Right.
you have to decide. And for me, that meant I never left well, I never left, but I did complain and move on, but I never left for money alone. And
Mm,
I know that's a privilege. Both my husband and I were working, but we didn't come from a lot of money. So it was important to know that you were being fairly compensated. But I wasn't prepared. In those days, everybody in data and research could go to Wall Street and make a lot of money. And
mm,
I just wasn't that interested in banks. And
mm,
so I thought I'd rather work on people's lives, people's values, consumer products. That's just more important for me. So
mm,
those are feelings, not facts. And it meant that I was driving to this voice, I call it, because I don't know what else to call it, that is who I'm about. And that was a very important step. I'm trying to think what other things I told them. Picked by people for sure. Oh, and then this idea that it's always good to, if the company wants you to do something, what they really would like is for you to be happy doing that,
mm.
because you're going to do better if you're happy. They
Right.
can't really make you happy. You have to decide if you can find your place in the thing they'd
Mm,
like for you to do.
mm,
I always say another thing was, we didn't have a healthcare practice. The notion of healthcare. Oh, and I should probably correct that, right? I was the chief strategy officer for the healthcare practice.
got it.
Yeah, but we didn't have that practice. And somebody said, "Hey, Belle, you're smart. Can you help us start a healthcare practice?" And I thought, well, I don't really know much about this, and I failed biology, but I'll try. And so I didn't really fail, but it wasn't my thing. And I said to them, well, we can start this practice, but we need some experts, right? We need to bring in people. Like, I can ask the right questions. We need to bring in people with credential and credibility. And the truth is, it was very, very financially lucrative for the company. And so I guess I could have said, no, I don't like science or something, but it seemed like you should be open to things that you might not know are are going to be great,
Right.
and make them as great as you can. So
Right.
that's
Right.
another one. Try to do the thing they want you to do, because they actually really they need it. And if you make it something, then you're the only one who can do it. That was one of my secrets to job security. I said yes to a lot of things, like the brand study that we developed in 1993. We didn't know where it was going to go. Brand Asset Valuator is still a tool. It's part of why the company was bought by WPP, because of that tool. But we didn't know that. But I thought, well, we could learn a lot of things, and we did learn a lot of things. And so, since learning and growing was my first pillar, it just made sense.
Right.
It just
I-
made sense.
Can we go into that too at the brand asset
Yeah.
calculator? How did you contribute to that? How were you a part of that? I'd
Oh,
love to hear the story.
that's a good story, actually. And there's really, somebody recently described me as the godmother of BAV. But I will say, when the study was conceptualized, and it's like any success. There are a lot of people who say they were, responsible for it.
Sure.
I was a baby analyst, right? We were still doing what's called card column punch coding, right? We used to collect data. We didn't have any menu driven software to do analysis. We were used to kind of brand surveys,
Mm,
but we ended up wanting to be, so we had a CEO with a vision who wanted to be the smartest agency on Madison Avenue. And he said, we have to have data. They still talk about it this way. The people that work on it now say it's bringing, data to the opinion party. So we just thought we should be smarter about brands than anybody else. And so we collected some survey data. And we were global, and global expansion was a big deal. And we collected it in 5 countries on what we called the brandscape.
mm,
We had some very senior research experts, and then we had a bunch of us who were going to work on data analysis. But it's an empirically derived theory. So we basically invented the theory by looking at what responses we got to brands.
mm,
So there was all kinds of magic associated with it, and it took off. But the very beginning of the study was a bunch of people in the research department who didn't have, who didn't have PCs, who didn't know how to use Excel, and we were ranking brands. We were learning the software at the same time that we were collecting the data. It was a wild time.
Wow.
Um, but the company was going to be sold, and the idea was to make something, an asset that could be
Mm.
valued and that would be worth it
Hmm.
to, at that time, Martin Sorrell, to buy the company. And years later, for years, Y&R leadership before VML came along protected BAV. We didn't give it to the holding company. It was a big fight. They started a tool called, what was it called? I don't know, but it's not there anymore to kind of compete with BAV.
Mm.
It became a massive undertaking.
Hmm.
Um, the very beginning, there were only a few of us. It became, a huge part
Hmm.
of.
Why do you
um,
think it took off so much compared to other, I'm sure even other ones that you maybe even
Well,
didn't hear of?
You'd
Tried.
be surprised how non-quantitative a lot of early brand work was. Even
Mm.
oh, now I can't come up with his name, but he's famous. In those days, there just wasn't a lot of data. Like the guy who got all kinds of reputation, I can look him up, for brand work. The study had 35 brands in it. We had maybe 1,000 in the US in the beginning. I mean, that's a lot of brands.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we were able to show, another great thing that happened is shortly after we fielded and we were trying it out, I took data based on many people's analysis and I presented it to the Kentucky Fried Chicken client. And it was data that suggested that McDonald's and Burger King were duking it out over price, and that the brands with momentum, this will show you how long ago this was, were California Pizza Kitchen and Outback Steakhouse. And the account guys and the agency leadership was like, you're going to tell Kentucky Fried Chicken not to worry about McDonald's. How
Mm.
dare you? And I said, look, that's what the data say. Do I know for sure? For sure? No, but we were measuring a component of brand that had to do with momentum. And
Mm.
the way we did the analysis, we were able to identify brands on the move.
Mm.
Established brands were established brands, but brands on the move. And I did present that data in Louisville, and the sales guys in the audience were cheering because they were in the field. They understood, not just from looking at syndicated data on sales, but from momentum in the marketplace, that those were the brands with juice. And the fact that the study could identify that was really helpful. And then
Mm.
we built it into our strategic processes. I mean, we're talking so many years ago that it's hard for people to remember that there didn't always used to be data. So
Right, right.
we used to
Yeah,
say,
it's
in
easy
the
to take
land
it
of
for
the
granted.
blind, right? In the land
Yeah.
of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, right? So we had more data than anybody else. We couldn't say for sure. Then we spent, oh my gosh, the company invested and started working with a whole bunch of financial analysts, and they built this tool. One of the guys who started to run the study was very into the market, and he said, "Look, I'm going to show you that the brands that if we made a fund with these brands that we're calling, the momentum brands, that the EVA and MVA were going to be better, right? The added value was going to be better for those brands." And it came out. I
Mm.
mean, I didn't invest in that fund, but
Mm.
I do think, it was kind of miraculous that people's perceptions of these brands, just regular old consumers,
Mm.
were able to predict what was happening.
Right.
Finance people
Fascinating.
always were taken with this idea. So it gave marketing some grounding,
Yeah.
right? Some true grounding. Marketing is always a hard investment for companies to prove back. So I don't know. It was fantastic. It was really great. It was about a 10 or 12-year stint at BAV, and then I kind of missed being on the line. And then that whole thing happened with healthcare, and they said, come on, help us
Right,
make
right,
it
right.
happen. So that was from like maybe 2004. So that was the end of my career. So the
Right.
first, I did marketing for 10 years without BAV. It was better the 10 years with it. And then healthcare was a whole other chapter.
Right, right. So I want to go back to kind of finding your voice, especially
Mhm.
for someone at the start of their journey. I feel like you have a lot of insight there. What do you think is the most important thing when it comes to charting that course? You know, someone that's starting out on their marketing communication journey.
Right. So, first of all, the whole book, the whole genesis of this book, Your Path and Your Voice, was about helping those kind of people starting out. And I think my daughter used to say, Mom, when people call you for advice, you make them cry. And I'd be like, no, I just want them to understand that they have to tell the story of themselves in a way that's valuable to the person listening.
Mm,
So, um, you don't know in the beginning. So in the beginning, I say take any job, right? Take the job you can get. And then I have lots of ideas about what your resume ought to look like to get to that job and all of that. But take the job you can get. Oh, and I should say that I lately people will send me resumes and I'll go, this is unreadable. And they'll say, well, I have to put all these words in because the AI is scanning it on LinkedIn. And I say, yes, you do. But when I ask you for your resume, I want you to think about it like a marketing strategy document. I want you to tell me, I want you to think about the 6 or 7 things you want to tell me. And I want you to build those into your talk track. And I want those stories to be the things that that
mm,
you want me to know. And if I don't ask the right questions when you meet me, you have to say, what I really want you to know about me is this. And there are lots of polite ways to say that.
mm,
I once looked at a resume and it was for healthcare, and the person, had this resume was a chronology of what she was doing. So the top, in what I call the good real estate place of the resume,
hmm
had um, a project that she was working on, a public health project. So I said, "Tell me about this." It was the thing my eye went to the minute I clicked, right?
right?
I said, "Tell me about this public health project." And she said, "Well, I really didn't do very much." And I stopped the interview and I said, "Then don't put it on your resume.
Yeah.
This is not a chronology of everything you have done. This is a marketing document designed to make me interested in helping you."
Mm,
Right? And by the way, what do you think I'm thinking when I meet you for the first time? I used to do this in my class. I taught a class the last, I guess, 7 years of my working life. And I said to them, what do you think I'm thinking? And they would say things like, oh, can I do the job? And am I a hard worker? I said, no, I want to know if you're fun to work with. I want to understand if you're going to help me do my job.
mm,
Right? I don't want to know that you are um, that you're desperate to learn. I mean, I looked at resumes and said, beginner resumes. People said, I don't have any experience. I don't have any job. How am I ever going to make this right? And sometimes I'd go down all the way to I had a guy graduate from liberal arts program and I couldn't find anything interesting on his resume. And at the very bottom, it turned out he was like the project manager for his chorus. And I said to him, and when he talked about that, he talked about it with passion and excitement, and he liked organizing them. And I said, okay, so that's the story of
mm,
you that I want to see expressed in the rest of the resume.
right.
So I think that's what I would say to people. When I would interview in the beginning, if I was working with people on their resumes, I would just ask them to talk about things they liked to do, talk about accomplishments that they had that they felt good about. And then you kind of weave that back into who are they, and then how does the experience on their resume reflect the who they are.
Mm,
The other thing is your first job is not going to be the voice job, right? It's going to be the opportunistic job. It's your second job. This is where my daughter said,
mm,
"You make them cry, Mom," because the they don't have their first job and you're talking to them about their second job. I said, yeah, they got to understand this is a journey. This
mm,
group of people are going to live to be 100, right? More than 100. They're going to
yeah.
be working for a very long time.
Mm. Yeah,
They
you're not going to
probably,
land what you want right away.
yeah. I mean, unless you're super lucky, I don't know too many people who find that purpose. I
Well,
certainly
I think
didn't.
that's why a lot of them do say, "I want to learn." Right? I think that's
Hmm.
an easy trap for them to fall into.
Hmm.
Can you dive a little bit more into why that's not a good idea and what they
Yeah,
should say
I
instead?
just, it used to be if people look, if you're a beginner, you're going to learn, but your job is not to learn. So to say I want a job where you can learn, to me, is a red flag. And the reason it's a red flag is it suggests that if I say to you, right now, the thing we need the most is for somebody to read through this data set and get rid of the duplicates and make sure that there's, that where there's human error, make sure that that's fixed. Now, there's lots of tools for that. I get that. But I don't want someone saying to me, well, what am I learning from that? Because that's the job that we have to do that's getting in our way right now, right? Of making the project successful. I catch typos. The kids think it's so funny. That I worked with, I can't not see a typo. It's a sickness. But it's the kind of typo that now spell check doesn't catch, right? So they all say, oh, but it's spell check. Or sometimes when they used to put in spell check, the headlines didn't get checked. And I get tripped up on the headlines. I'd be like, this is wrong, this is wrong. So I think when people say, what am I learning? Then I suspect that they're not going to be as valuable to the team as we need. I mean, look, this is a collaborative world, not just business. It used to, I was very sensitive in the beginning of this perspective while it was developing that I only really knew this industry, right? But the truth is, everything's merged now. Everything is everything. And I don't care if you're doing communications in tech or you're doing communications for consumer products. You're working in a team. So there is nobody today that doesn't work in a team. I mean, I find it astounding. I think that's a misconception almost about the industry. If you think about Mad Men or whatever you're learning, you think there's this one creative genius who somehow is able to solve everybody's problem. And I had, even in the beginning of my career, was like, what do you mean we need 5 people to read this and we need to redo it? It's not like college, right? It's not your own paper. But even when my kids were in school and even college now, everybody works in teams, right? We used to hire these interns and do this intern project. And every summer, at least 2 teams, maybe if there were 7, would say, oh my gosh, this team is terrible. The creative guy's not listening. The account guy wants to just boss everybody around. We can't work as a team. And I'd be like, well, that's a lesson. That happens in the real world. And if you can figure it out, great. Like, no person from the company is going to come and intervene. Your project will suffer because of that. Your team project will suffer. If you guys can't work it out, you'll have learned something important. You might not win the intern competition, but you'll have learned something very important. See if you can figure it out. I mean, if somebody was really, well, it didn't happen. It was just more like they just couldn't gel as a team.
So learning is basically going to happen no matter what. Even
no
if
matter
you
what,
want to learn, you're going to learn.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. I mean, if you tell me you want a job where you can work with a team and help the team produce, that's an objective I could see in a beginning resume.
Sure.
Right? Because that's what people need.
Yeah. Yeah.
Of course you're going to have personal growth. Right?
So that's what you would say in replace of I want to learn is
sure.
I want to make
a job where I can contribute to a team's functioning, a job where I can help clients see the value of consumer insight in their work.
I love that answer so much because it implies that you're going to learn in order to be able to do that. So the learning is just, it's going to happen.
Well, I think it does. I think when young people think about it, it's the same reason they aren't sure what an interviewer is looking for, right? They think they have to kind of dazzle with skill or something. I can do this and I can do that and I did this and I did that. And that's helpful to know. But it's not enough. It's
Mhm.
not enough. I mean, there's sort of two stories about that. When I first was talking about this, my experience was more about being hired in agencies in the client service or account management side and then in the strategy side. But I talked to a lot of creative people who said, look, of course their books have to be good. But if they're going to be difficult and fussy about their assignments, that's a harder hurdle that they have to get over. Yeah, there's a basic level of competence. A question I get asked a lot is, do you have to have an advertising background? Like, what about, what if you don't have a business background? Well, for sure I didn't, but that's why I don't think path is so useful. And what I always say to people is, a lot of people who studied advertising have an easier time maybe getting the interview, maybe talking the talk when they come in, but it also can breed overconfidence because school is not real life.
Mm.
And they think that they can do better in the job. It doesn't make them better at their job. It might make them a little more conversant in the challenges. I mean, I'm not denying that people who come from great schools with great advertising programs don't have great skills. I'm sure they do. I'm just saying, if I were a regular liberal arts person, I don't think you should be discouraged about that. I'm not sure if in the tech space, I mean, we usually, well, we didn't used to give tests of things,
Hmm.
but we do expect people to be thinking about strategy, right? Why do you think this advertiser did that? How does it work? I mean, at more senior levels now, they do ask you to prepare
Mm.
um, a written piece or something. It makes it harder. But I
Right.
think in the entry level place, if you just recognize that you're gonna keep that it's a journey, that you're going to have some interviews that maybe they're not going to go so well, that you're going to shape what it is you want to say about yourself.
Mm.
Um, and you're going to practice. I tell people to practice, like look in the mirror and answer the question, tell me about yourself.
Mm.
Answer the question, what do you like to do? I used to ask people all the time, how do you like to spend your spare time? And I think they didn't understand why I was asking it, but I was trying to have them say something so that I could ask a question about it so that I could see how the answer would go.
Mm. Hmm.
So I understood them better.
Right.
So I
Right.
could ask my next question, in a
Yeah.
different kind of way.
Yeah.
Well, this is what consumer insight people do. I
Yeah.
recently met somebody on a train and got invited to it was somebody who works for one of the senators. And so I got a little back Capitol tour. But, she took us all kinds of places. And I told my kids, and they said to me, oh, yeah, Mom, everyone just talks to people on the train and then gets a tour of the Capitol. I was like, well, I do. If you're hard to talk to, one of the other questions I get asked a lot is it better to be an extrovert? I mean, it's easier,
Sounds like yes, maybe. Yeah.
maybe, but it doesn't mean that. It means if you're an introvert, you have to work a little harder
Mm.
in the interviewing and in the
Right.
place because it might make it easier, not better, but easier to get.
Hmm.
I'm sure there are jobs where um it doesn't matter quite so much, but this is marketing. I don't know what to
Right.
say, right?
What are your thoughts on recording it? You said speak in the mirror. I just think if you're going through several interviews, there's apps now on your phone where if you were to record it, and go
Yeah,
back and listen to it.
yeah. I mean, you could. I mean, it was never. I mean, we didn't always have those, right? I guess I would. Why not? Like,
Yeah,
why
why
not?
not?
Unless the interviewer doesn't, unless it's
Yeah. It's
they're not
probably
going to.
too cringy for most people, right? Because it's hard to look at yourself when you're
Yeah, maybe.
not at your best or most comfortable.
I would say start with the talk track, right?
Hmm.
What are the 5 things you want to tell me about yourself? And then whatever I ask, tell me those. So that the person who said to me, I didn't do very much, I couldn't just let that go. you
Mm.
know?
Hmm.
Um, I had a student and I did a practice interview. I did a lot of career development work, right? So we would come in the morning and we would do practice interviews with students. And the student told me that while she was in school, she worked at Bloomingdale's. I put this story in. She worked at Bloomingdale's. And I said, "Oh, really? Tell me about working in Bloomingdale's." And she said, "Well, I'm just in sales." And I said to her, "Okay, stop. You're not supposed to stop these practice interviews." I said, "First of all, we're never going to say I'm just in sales." I said, "But second of all, what do you think marketing is?" So let's practice another answer like, well, how's it if I say, "What's it like working at Bloomingdale's?" Which is pretty much of a softball, right? I mean, you could say anything.
Yeah.
I want you to say, if you really want to know what it's like to um, deal with difficult clients, spend an hour on the sales floor in Bloomingdale's.
Mm.
That's what I wanted her to tell me,
Mm.
right? And she did, and she's had a kind of a cool career actually.
Mm.
But I think reframing the answer to be more from the perspective of the interviewer, it's a hard thing to do, but that's a skill that's worth practicing. And probably, if I think about it, you asked about my path, and I didn't really talk about how I got into research, but probably the ability to think about the other person's perspective
Mm.
was probably a skill that came from who knows what, intuitive and then honed. But
Right.
that's probably the part of the voice that I didn't know was needed and then kind of
Mm.
understood was needed. When that guy said to me, "Belle, I think you're going to like research better,"
Yeah.
he was right.
Yeah, I think the research is a really interesting thing from when I look at your career path and what you like to talk about, what you're passionate about. I think the research, it seems like that's one of those things where you found your way there and it really was a natural inclination. You were probably really good at it initially because you enjoyed it. And then because you're good at it, right? Like you said earlier, you're happy, you spend more time on it, you learn, you get better, and that translates over. It's not just about going there and looking for things, it's about how to also frame things in a way that's going to be received well. So that research is the most valuable, most useful, right?
It's funny. Yes, for me, I did get this degree as a master's, but it wasn't to do that. I didn't know it was going to be like research part of the business. I also didn't have a hugely impressive quantitative skill base. And then sometime around 1986, so I'd been working almost 10 years, and data was coming and the software was changing, and a bunch of guys would come in and they would snow me. Now, I had looked at a lot of tables. I had sat there with percentages by hand and looked at a lot of data. But these guys came in and they talked this fast talk, and I thought, I'm getting snowed and I don't have the skills. And so I enrolled. I'm like, I can't even believe it. I decided maybe I would get a PhD or a doctorate, and I didn't. But I did enroll in education because they gave me the most credits
Mm.
in New York, and I went, nights for a couple, maybe, and I took multivariate analysis. I understood the software better. I took new statistics. I took a lot of stuff that I needed to take because I didn't take it in college. And I got to this place where I no longer could get snowed. And then I wanted to be the president of the PTA. So I
Mm.
gave up that. I decided I wasn't going to finish. But because the business wouldn't have valued it, but I got what I needed about it. So I do encourage people from a skill standpoint to keep them sharp, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but again, only if it's something you're gonna want to know about. Like if
Right.
I hadn't, what was happening is I was working with somebody who was helping me. It was the beginning of the brand study, and she was no 86 was too early. We were just looking at data. So, and she knew a lot of stuff, and I thought I would like to know some of that stuff.
Mm.
It just would make me more confident,
Right.
and it did. It
Oh, that's
did.
a good way to
So
frame it. What would I need to know in order to feel more confident?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
I just needed more research. I needed to be more quant. And then years later, they would call me whenever some, and I'm going to say, whenever some business person would come in and start talking about, like, we had a client who hired this consultant, and the consultant came in and they were going to make the strategy, right? They did a piece of research and they were going to present the results to us. And that was supposed to be the creative strategy. And they came out and they started to present, and they had a strategy that had, like, I don't know, 50 parts. I don't know. When you do an ad strategy, I used to say, still do, strategy is sacrifice, right? You have to
Hmm.
kind of focus, decide what it is. Advertising is kind of a blunt tool. So what is going to be the thing you want to take away?
Mm-hmm.
And this poor consultant came in and she said, now people want this and they want this and they want these 10 things, and that's what you should put in your ads. And I so that I was the one who had to say, listen, strategy is not, that's not a creative strategy. That's good to know. We have to have ways of addressing all these needs, but we need a little help focusing. And she said, well, we ran a factor analysis and these were the top things. And again, it was like 5 things. And I said to her, because I had studied it, well, factor analysis, it's kind of a creative tool. So what would you say if I had to pick one? They couldn't do that.
Hmm.
And they couldn't say factor analysis is a creative tool. Like, they couldn't do that. So
Hmm.
I needed some ammunition so that I could come back in the same way, not in a hostile way, but just in an informed way.
Right.
Because they didn't have such great grounding.
Right.
They didn't have all these, they had 2 courses in market research. I mean, it's not, I know the limits of what I know and what I don't know, but there, I guess, because I just kept reading and studying, and that, they were high, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that is interesting, right? The sacrificing is hard, I think, for a lot of people in almost everything in life, right? We all want to do it all, but
Yeah.
at the end of the day, you have to. And how do you make the case for that? How do you make the case for cutting out all of these different factors that, seem
Well,
like,
so it's funny. So I'm a believer in all kinds of research, right? In quantitative research, but also in qualitative research. So I think you have to bring real people into the equation. Like, what do real people want and say?
Mhm.
Sometimes you'll do user experience research. You'll work with those people, and they'll tell you it has to be able to do these 10 things. And as a user, it's too confusing. When the interface is bad. I did an online thing the other night and I thought, this is terrible, this particular thing. I know it's gamified, but it's terrible. It's impossible to follow. So I guess I feel like if real people are telling you something, you really can't discount it. And so
Mm.
I believe and that's just not 2 focus groups either. That's more ethnographic type techniques.
Mhm.
It's, um, it's techniques where people are giving you the truth. I worked a lot in the breast cancer space, and people's real lives, mattered. And I worked with a team that was creating it was kind of like an unboxing video. We didn't call it that then, but it was kind of when you signed up for the program, and we were pitching a client, and they made a video about that was going to help us sell this client on this idea that you should have these things in the starter kit for the drug. So it was a kit that would help people start on the drug. And the video that they made to show the client, had this announcer saying, and when Catherine receives her starter kit, she's delighted to see. And I said to them, she's not delighted about anything. She has terminal breast cancer.
Mm.
Like, we need to be changing the way, and it was only because we had listened to so many women talk,
Mm.
in personal interviews, that I just knew it was wrong. I said, we're not going to the client and saying,
Mm.
um, and with a video that says Catherine is delighted to see the new drug comes in the mail. She's not delighted. This
Right.
is not what's happening in her life. So I guess my answer to that would be just take away the jargon, take away the, it's not only tech people, but just take away the jargon, take away tech speak, take away um, what you need, and just try to focus for a minute on what the person really needs. And
Hmm.
if you focus on what the person really needs, I think you will have a more effective way to say to people,
Hmm.
yes, they know this, but they don't care.
Hmm.
I I dabbled a little. I wasn't an expert in this, but in how do you demonstrate the effectiveness? I think people don't focus enough on is it working, right? Is it
Hmm.
working? I mean, all those annoying ads that people see for drugs, if they're really annoying, they're going to be annoying to everyone. They work differently. Um, I think you have to have respect for your audience, and I'm not sure that everybody who's creating messaging does do that.
Hmm.
It's not easy. There's not a silver bullet, but
Right.
just remember real people. That's what I would say.
Yeah. I feel like we're moving away from that now too, especially with AI. We're
Yeah.
asking ChatGPT, give me a research analysis about XYZ. And we're not talking to the people.
No, I mean there is nobody who prefers, I mean, do you prefer to Google and get the AI directions someplace? Sure, who cares, right? But when you're calling a company, right? The fact that you need to call
Hmm.
means there's something that you're not getting from the tech. So don't tell me 10 times while I'm on hold. I could send you a link and you could solve this online. Don't you think I tried that already? You know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's a whole can of worms. I'm not. Fortunately, I'm retired. I'm not anti AI. I'm not pro. I just don't want to. I think we have to recognize that some things are better automated and some things are better with people.
Right.
You
Right.
know.
Yeah. I wonder how the education system is going to be
Yeah.
now. You were a teacher. Tell me about how that experience was.
Oh, so that's an interesting thing. So I come from a long line of school teachers. When I went to college, when I graduated, everybody thought I would be a teacher. And that's when I said, no, I'm going to make Sesame Street, which is kind of like being a teacher, but it was media. And so I kind of migrated. Um, but then I was the president of the PTA when my kids were little because I could help. It was a charity thing. It was a community thing. And then when I don't know, I guess it was about, I had already begun. I think the book was, no, because I published the book after. I was already kind of in this role where I got asked a lot of the same questions. My kids were looking for work. My kids' friends were looking for work. My friends' kids were looking for work. And then I got involved with a program at CCNY, which is the public university in Manhattan, that used to be called the Harvard of the Proletariat when in the 50s when my dad went there.
Hmm.
But they, well, late 40s, but they were setting up a program for an advertising master's that was called Branding and Integrated Communications. And I thought that it would be, and they were going to use professionals to teach. Now, that's
Hmm.
a gimmick that universities do because then they don't have to hire full time faculty, and that's a whole other thing. But I
Hmm.
think in case of professional development and professional education, it makes sense. I always said I'm only going to teach there as long as I'm still working because then at least my knowledge is current.
Right.
But it remains a big school for new citizens, for people of color, for people who don't have access to other kinds of schools. And
Hmm.
so I started to teach there primarily because we would do these professional development workshops. I met the director and I said I could help with that. And then I helped her with curriculum. I encouraged her to make sure everybody took statistics before they came in,
Mm,
that you need, everybody was going to need data. I mean, there were things we did that made a ton of sense.
mm,
Um, but it was really a professional development program. CCNY is an amazing place. It's got amazing history. It's a big part of New York. I mean, both my parents went there.
mm.
Because there's one in every borough. I do think the education system has to change. I think we have to create people who are exposed to media and understand the difference between media and, between hype and truth, and between media and real life. But the place that I think I've seen the biggest changes. So when my kids were little and I worked at the PTA, there was this belief that you could teach reading with something called whole language, which was about topics. So in first grade, no matter whether you read or not, everybody was going to do squirrels, right? And if you knew how to read and write, you would write a story about squirrels. And if you didn't, you would draw a picture about squirrels. I volunteer now we're in Virginia, in Alexandria, in a less high achieving school, and it's serious phonics. It is serious, break it down, teach it. It's more like software, right? Teach the sounds, teach the irregular sounds, and I was surprised because I kind of thought we'd be reading to students, and we're not. We're actually teaching phonics. So I think that's an improvement, personally.
Mm-hmm.
I think more rigor in the teaching of reading is useful. Now, can everybody learn that way? No. There are tremendous learning differences in the world, and a good teacher can teach many different styles, right? And too
Right.
many different styles. I do think we have to keep grounding people with I read poetry to my grandson now because he likes the sound of the words.
Mm.
So I don't think he knows what all the words mean. I
Mm-hmm.
think he just likes the scheme, right? It's a little musical, it's a little
Mm-hmm. Yeah, rhythmic.
rhythmic. So I don't know. I think they are changing. I think, unfortunately, the world has become a very fractioned place. And so not everybody has the same opportunities. And I think that's a shame. But I think I still believe in the power of education to,
Yeah.
make a difference and make a change. And so.
Right. Well, and a lot of it's that self education. I mean,
Mhm.
your book is an example of that, helping someone at that early stage. Are there other places that you would point people to try
So
to get a leg up?
a woman I know just wrote a book. She's at CCMY too. Hers is a little more. It's called Classroom to Workplace.
Okay.
Her name is Lynn Applebaum. But again, I think people should read everything. So I think you should read literature. I think you should. I mean, these are very old-fashioned values, but I think they have shown that education has the power to help people see broader perspectives, and I believe in that. Um, so where else would I go? Let's see. I mean, people laugh all the time, but um, it's funny how music and poetry, music and rhymes have so much staying power, right? Like all these young people who quote Schoolhouse Rock to talk about civics,
Mm.
I think and even Sesame Street, recognizing the power of media to educate is an important step. I mean, look, all the kids have iPads now in school, better
Right.
school. And they should, right? That's the world they're going to live in. I was a little surprised at this school where I'm working with the phonics people. they're also teaching the kids to write. I mean, they really are. They're focused on penmanship, printing. I don't know. I think they teach cursive also. Apparently, that's back too.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
even if just for the discipline, maybe it's not so bad. I'm
Yeah.
not. I think there's a lot of things that we should not go back to, but I don't
Hmm.
think math and reading are part of that. I think math and reading are helpful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm optimistic. I think it's a little bit of a strange time. We're trying to figure it out. And I agree.
Mhm.
Keep listening, keep absorbing as much as you can, and keep trying things. And remember
Yeah.
that it is a journey, right? We're all probably gonna, live a
That
lot
to
longer.
me is oh, there's a bug. That to me is the most important perspective that I guess comes with age is when you look at it across the journey.
Mm-hmm.
It all sounds so neat and packaged now. It's kind of messy along the way, right?
Right.
Kind
Right.
of messy. Um, and there's plenty of crying, and there's plenty of push pull. I can't remember who said the most important thing to pick is your person, though. Like
Mm.
somebody said, it's somebody like that the most important decision you're going to make is who you're going to be with.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Not what job you're going to have or what. And I think there is something in that. Um,
Yeah. I've heard that too recently, that I think that it's the biggest contributor to your happiness.
yeah, that must be it.
Something
It must
something
have been
like
a
four
straight.
times more than work or something like that.
Yeah,
Work
yeah.
is obviously really important too, but yeah, the people, which is I'm glad you said pick your people, because
I,
at the
I,
end
I
of the day, we're all just people trying to. That's what a company is. It's just a collection of individuals.
100%. I mean, there are companies that run around saying it's a family. I That was never something that I liked very much. I
Yeah.
know why people say it. They want you to feel a part of it. They want you to feel, but shared values and whatever. But
Yeah.
it's. I never felt that, and I never felt. And maybe this is important too. Like I was always kind of sort of a round peg in a square hole, or a square peg, I guess, in a round hole. I never really, and that was how I learned to pick people. I'd get in a job and I'd think, I don't really want to be like that person when I grow up. I don't really want to be like that, but I got to find a job where I do want to be like that person when I grow up.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
another thing. So,
Mm. Yeah.
um, most people will help you if you focus on that. If you focus on that. I wasn't an especially good networker either, because I was a little, it sounds funny. It's not that I was shy. I just felt like I had to figure it out for myself.
Mm.
Um, but I did connect to people and then talk to them as people, and then they were willing to help you. I had a girl,
Mm.
an intern once say to me, she was a junior. She had a great internship at MTV. And then she went back to school. And a couple months later, MTV offered her a job for when she graduated. And she said to me, but I already worked there. And I said, no, you didn't. You were an intern, and they think you're great. And that's why they offered you a job. So take the job. And then if you don't like it, the next job will be a whole lot easier for you to get.
Right.
You
Right.
can't turn that down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
So I don't know. I also always said to people, if you worked in Bloomingdale's or in Barnes and Noble or whatever, talk about it. Just reframe it to be about the thing that I need for it to be about.
Right. Right.
I
Yeah.
believe in work, that's for sure. I don't care what kind of work.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Use it as like a marketing exercise, right? To reframe it.
100%. If you can't do that, I remember when my niece graduated, she had a communications degree. My sister-in-law called me and said, she's having all these interviews from the professors, but there's so many interviews and then they don't go anywhere and then they're not jobs. And I said, yeah, it's really hard. And she said, but it's so discouraging. And I said, yes. And if you want to be in marketing, it's like it's practice for what it's like to work.
Right.
You bring an idea, the idea is not what they want, you reframe the idea. So
Right.
just start with yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I've always had that idea. I heard it from someone, which is like everything's a practice for the big show.
Yeah,
It's all if you just
great,
reframe it that way,
great.
it's a little
Then you can't
easier.
be discouraged. Listen, would I be sad of all the rejection? Of course, but somehow try to chalk it up to I'm shaping that story better.
Right, right.
No, I don't know. I don't know. It's fun to think about. I didn't have all that advice. I did have a woman who, when I figured out that I wanted to really be in research, and I thought I do want to be like her when I grow up. So that was helpful. But it took a while to find her,
Mm,
you know, and you have to be willing to, show people or talk to people or learn from people that you might not, you know, that you might not have thought were the people, right?
hmm
Not just the famous people, the good people.
Right.
So
Love it.
I don't know. That's what I believe anyway. It helped me. It
Yeah.
helped me, that's for sure.
Well, thank you, Belle. I know we're at time here, but it's been really great talking with you and just hearing
I
everything
hope
about
so.
your journey and that path. So thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Okay, well, it was fun. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Pixel Perfect podcast, where we go down the rabbit hole on the journey and motivations of creatives and entrepreneurs. Stay tuned for more stories to come. Until next time.